Ever since 2020, there has been a lot of things happening in the world, both good things in pop culture, but also very, very terrible things happening in the world. And as someone who has been working in social media for over the past 7 years, whether I've been literally behind the scenes of managing accounts for brands and businesses, I've always been hyper aware of world events and pop culture and how it affects social media. And most importantly, how do you respond? And do you even respond when these types of things are happening? I actually did a live video in 2022 where I covered this topic when something specific happened, which we'll be covering in this episode. And it resonated so much. Still to this day, I get people saying it was such a helpful resource and conversation that needs to be had. And so I wanted to kind of create a more permanent resource that you can easily share and reference back to when we're navigating these types of things and really helping you understand when should you say something, how should you say something, and how to navigate these types of things that are going to come up on social media. Even as I'm recording this, there is so much going on in the social media and online space. There is the genocide in Gaza. There is the Paris Olympics. There is Kamala being endorsed by Biden and her whole campaign and the brat trend, which I honestly fully don't even know what's going on there. And then there's also Sonia Massey's murder that happened in Illinois just the past week ago. And so there's so much going on, and it can be really hard to identify, do we address these things? Do we speak up? Do we use this as a trending opportunity for something fun like the Olympics? And do you have to speak up on these more serious matters? So I'm going to break down why what you post on social media really matters, how and when to respond to these types of situations, and we'll wrap things up with a few examples and helpful takeaways. So why does what you post on social media even matter? And this is hyper relevant to people that are managing accounts for social media. Maybe you have an agency like myself. Maybe you are a social media manager. Maybe you even work for a business or a brand and do their social media. It's really important for us to be the people that are helping advise these types of situations, with the very important caveat that I never think that a social media manager should take the fall for any of these types of situations not being handled the right way. This also is hyper relevant for personal brands, coaches, service providers, educators, creators, because you are the person behind the brand and that's a big part of your business. It's really important that your values will naturally seep into the content that you create and how you create content on social media. And honestly, even if you're not a personal brand, but you're a CEO or founder and kind of the face of your company, it's really important to really keep a lot of these things in mind in terms of what you do and don't post on social media. It's really important to have awareness on social media when addressing or posting certain things. And more importantly, you have to consider all of the layers that go into specific situations. So even if you are responding, you actually have all the context, all the information you need to actually say the appropriate thing versus reacting or responding because you feel the pressure that you should. At the end of the day, almost all of us want to create a safe space on social media for our community, for our audience, for our followers. So we want to make sure we're never offending people unintentionally. Of course, you can never make everyone happy, and it's totally okay to create content that's going to repel people that just aren't a good fit or don't have aligned values, but you never want to create content that is harmful unintentionally. An example of this actually was a product brand. They create clothing and their female founder posted this video. I cannot get it out of my mind because I just could not believe it was posted, where essentially she was taking a pregnancy test. She showed the pregnancy test and it was oh, I'm pregnant with our new product. We're launching a new product. And I was like, that, first of all, is just very personal, very insensitive to pregnancy loss and infertility. And I was like, could we have just marketed a different way? Was that the only thing we could think of? I just think that is a really great example of some people are like, oh, that's so funny. Oh, you play too much, blah, blah, blah. But it's no, you actually were playing too much. And that probably hurt and was triggering for a lot of people, which you have to just think about, even if it's not your own experience. But most importantly, we're talking about this because social media is one and the same with pop culture and news and politics and world events. You cannot separate them. I think we all know this now from everything that happened in 2020. So that's why it's important to be in the loop, have a level of awareness so you don't say ignorant things. So now let's cover how and when to respond when these types of situations come up. When deciding on when and if you should respond or how to respond, these are some guiding questions I always like to come back to. The first is, do you actually understand what is going on? Have you taken a second to pause, to read, to get all the different perspectives, to get all the information that you need, instead of just reacting to one perspective, one thing you see off the bat? And do you truly understand the situation that happened? Do you have all the context and information that you need? And most importantly, is it relevant to either your audience or your brand values? So does it feel more important that you say something versus not at all? Would this offend your audience? Is this something your audience really cares about? And are you in a space where you are able to speak on hard things? If you are processing or still struggling with something that is happening, especially on the more negative side, you are definitely not in a place to speak on it fully. And so it's important to acknowledge your own capacity for these things. I think in 2020, we saw so many people feeling like they needed to speak up on Black Lives Matter and all these different topics. And I think so many people did it out of performance, not because they didn't care about it or not because it wasn't a value of theirs, but because there was so much pressure that if you didn't say something, you didn't care. And while I think it's important that people speak up on certain topics, I also don't believe that everyone inherently that has influence or visibility or anything like that should have to respond to everything that happens, or they get canceled if they don't. One of my friends and someone that I just admire so much when it comes to speaking up on all these types of things is Lissette. And she has a post exactly on this topic that I want to quote and reference. I'll also link it if you want to go to the whole post, check out Lissette. But I just feel like she put it better than I ever could. Quote unquote. Beyond better understanding the state of the world these last few weeks, I really hope we're also learning to wield the power of social media for impact. Impact doesn't mean sharing a viral post just because you feel it's what people want to see from you. No, it means sharpening media literacy skills to understand sources, bias, and nuance before sharing something that could do more harm than good. Impact doesn't mean speaking up solely because you felt the pressure to. It means taking time to pause, truly listen, and sharing what's on your mind when you feel ready to hold the space for it. For some, impact doesn't even have to do with what you're doing online. It's what you're doing offline and how you're investing time back into the communities that matter. Mic drop. We'll just leave that there. So now I want to go through a few situations so we can kind of give some context to some of the things that we mentioned, keeping in mind some of these are heavy, some of these are light, so take that with what you need. The first, which is really what inspired the initial live that I did in this conversation, was the Will Smith and Chris Rock slap. You can look into it. I don't need to give you guys context, but I just remember the day after that happened, there was so much going online and there were so many people making memes of the slap. And no matter what your thoughts, your perspectives on it, I think it lacked so much sensitivity of domestic violence, of race, of so many things that that situation really represented, that by making a meme out of it was very insensitive too and very reactive, because if you spent 12 hours after it actually happened to put it together a meme, you did not sit with it long enough. Another one that I've mentioned is the Astro World tragedy. Like I said, you guys can look into these things if you don't know what I'm talking about. Even after this tragedy happened, there were a lot of trending audios that Travis Scott had created. And whether you like him as an artist, whether you literally don't even know who he is as an artist, it felt very insensitive in light to what happened to then just use a trending audio with that person. And speaking of trending audios, this is like a very small but very important thing to understand with just pop culture and social media in general. Like, are there sexual references? Is there profanities? Do you actually know the ins and outs of like the artist's song that you're sharing? Because I think a lot of people just plop an audio on because it has a trending arrow without even realizing what the song is saying or what that actually means to be creating a piece of content to that. And if profanity and things like that is like totally fine and like a vibe for your brand, go for it. But if you're just plopping it on without even thinking about the audio that you're using, then there's a situation there. Even for our done for you monthly management clients, we are always thinking about what audios make sense for not only this brand, but like really culling through to make sure, like, is this going to offend people? Does this make sense to even be using? And keep in mind, I want to keep this light, and this also can refer to really fun things like the Super Bowl, for example. And the day after the Super Bowl is always just a lot going on. Everyone wants to create a meme, a trend, a video, a reaction, some type of content based on the Super Bowl. And while I think if something feels fun, if something feels super aligned for you to create that's happening in current events, like something fun like the Super Bowl halftime performance, go for it. But I think a lot of people, they open their app, they see so many people posting these trends, and they're like, oh, do I need to be posting this? And then our feeds are literally saturated with Super Bowl stuff for the next week, and everyone's sick and tired of seeing the same thing over and over again. And like I said, it could be a fun community building, kiki moment with your audience, but is it actually getting you closer to your goal? Is it actually moving the needle? Is the time that you spent researching and pulling together the meme and finding a trend and posting it like really in the moment, was that even worth it? Or could that have been better spent on other things? That's why, like, for our clients, we rarely, if anything, never even post those types of things because they just like aren't worth your time and energy, in my opinion. Like, post a story about it. Just keep it on stories. So to wrap things up, I want to leave you with two important takeaways or lessons that you can apply to your own social media strategy. The first is on a deeper level with the heavy things that are happening in the world. I want you to just take some time to reflect on your values as a brand, keeping in mind this can and should overlap to the human that is behind the brand as well. And know that every post that you create is a reflection on your brand. So when you're choosing an audio, when you're creating a meme, when you're responding to something that is happening in the world, is it on brand for you? Is it relevant for you to be talking about? And know by posting something that is unaligned with your brand, or by doing it in a way that's reactive and really isn't thoughtful, you could be harming your brand perception and losing trust with your community. So I'm not saying you need to watch the news every day. I'm not saying you need to consume hours and hours on social media, but you have to have a pulse on what's going on, especially if you're deciding on posting on it. And on the fun stuff, the world events like the Paris Olympics that's going on, fun things like that that's happening in pop culture. If it feels fun, if it feels aligned, if it feels like a heck yes, go for it. But I also want you to take some time and think about your strategy from a holistic point of view. And is it getting you closer to your goals? Is the time you're spending on this trendy types of content really worth it? Or could it be better spent on other types of content? And most importantly, are you doing it because of peer pressure or because you feel forced to do it? I hope this was a really helpful resource for you, and I would love to hear from you, whether you send me a DM, post about this on stories, respond in the YouTube comments, what really resonated with you, and if there's anything that I missed that you'd like to add to this conversation. And if you want to learn more about how to turn your brand values into content ideas, check out this video on content pillars. I'll see you in the next episode.